So today we're going to talk about the QT interval. Um, why the prolonged QT is dangerous, and actually what's going on in our long QT. So we know that the QT is actually from the start of the Q to the end of the T wave, and that represents actually from the start of the ventricular, the time duration from the start of the ventricular depolarization to the end of ventricular repolarization. In other words, we can say that it reflects the QT reflects the time duration of the action potential in the ventricular cells. I hope you remember this diagram. That is actually representing the duration of action potential in the ventricular cells, and that is actually a brief reversal of electric polarity of the membrane. So we know that this portion upstroke, that is because of the inward moment of the sodium channel, and this initial downstroke is because the potassium is moving out, and this plateau phase is because of the calcium is moving inward, and this rapid downward is because of the potassium is moving out. Okay, and that is actually representing the radiation of action potential in the ventricular cells. Okay, and that action potential, that is the depolarization as well as the repolarization, means this QT interval. Okay, this first one and the second one. Okay, this is what is happening actually. So this is the QT interval, and this is down here is exactly what is happening in the ventricular cells. Okay, the moment of ions. We know that. Okay, this is the action potential. Okay, the ventricular depolarization as well as the ventricular repolarization. Okay, in this QT interval, like here. Okay, and the down it is showing that what is actually happening, how the current moves. Now we know that, okay, when an action potential is occurring, okay, there is something that is called refractory period. What is that? It's a time period during which the cells are incapable of repeating an action potential. So this is a refractory period. Okay, the ventricular muscles cells, okay, they cannot pass another action potential during this period. So this is called a refractory period. Refractory period. Actually, let's discuss this refractory period now over here. Now, this refractory period, what we said over here, okay, if we magnify that one over here, it is divided into the two, okay. There was the all refractory period, and we divided actually this refractory period into the two. The first portion is the absolute refractory period, and the second one is relative refractory period. Okay, if we're going to divide it over here, so there's going to be, this portion is going to be the absolute refractory period, and when the ventricles are repolarizing, that is called relative refractory period. Okay, so the absolute refractory period is that no matter whatever you're going to do, an action potential cannot pass, a second action potential cannot pass. But in the relative refractory period, if you're going to apply a strong impulse, okay, another action potential can happen actually. That's the problem over here in the long QT, that this relative refractory period that prolongs. So when the relative refractory period that prolongs, so there are the chances that if a strong stimuli is given, okay, there could be another action potential. And if there is another action potential, say for example another QRS, so what's going to happen? If there is one QRS over here and there's a T, and we said that it's a relative refractory period over here, that's a relative refractory, say for example, and there was an absolute refractory, that's a relative refractory. Now if it's going to prolong and another action potential is given, what's going to happen? There will come another QRS. If that comes over there, so what's going to happen? There's going to be something like that, QRS. So two QRS in a row. Okay, so if this happens again, okay, that could induce the ventricular tachycardia. So that's a problem with the long QT, and that's why it is dangerous. Like the drugs can cause that. Hypoxia can cause that. Yeah, and excessive adrenergic stimuli. Okay, if there's a strong one, that can induce in a long QT or ventricular tachycardia.